Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be testing out the acrylic paints that I showed you in my last art supplies haul. If you haven't seen that video yet, then I will link it up here on the top right corner of the screen. And since we're working with acrylics today, I've got this very ugly protection mat on the table to protect, because this is my dining table. And let's start right away. So first we are going to swatch some colors. If swatching isn't really your thing, then feel free to skip ahead onto the timestamp here on the screen. And otherwise, let's get started. Something I realized when I was swatching the Pebeo Studio acrylics was that I kind of had a color that was quite similar to this buff titanium, which are the Winsor & Newton Galleria Acrylics Buff Titanium, as well as the Winsor & Newton Galleria Acrylics Pale Amber. And as you can see here, they look kind of similar, but they also look kind of different, especially the Pale Amber. And also especially after they have dried. This color is supposed to be a replacement to my deep violet from Daler-Rowney System 3, and here I decided to compare both of them to see how they look like. The Daler-Rowney System 3 deep violet also contains PV23, and as you can see, the Daler-Rowney one is much more darker than the Lucas one, so I'm very curious how the Lucas one is going to perform in color mixes, because I intended to buy it to darken my mixes. Some of the next colors left me questioning their opacity and whether the binders might have separated or not. First of all, this Payne's Grey is so beautiful, but it's transparent, and that's fine, but it is labeled as opaque, so I was a little surprised by its transparency and its trickiness. And by the way, this Mars Black is also very, very beautiful. I love the depth that it has. It's kind of looks like a void to me. For the light olive, I was a bit also surprised that it was labeled as opaque, because to be honest, I actually didn't expect it to be opaque at all. I just saw the color and I was like, oh, that looks like at least a semi-opaque color, which is, I think, the case here. And same with the Caput Mortuum, which had a very similar feel as the Payne's Grey. It's a little more transparent and it's a bit uneven, so I would also consider it as being semi-opaque rather than fully opaque. Okay, so we're not at the end of the video yet, but I already have a favorite, which is this Winsor & Newton Galleria Permanent Alizarin Crimson. It's just so beautiful. It has kind of a hint of pink in it, but also some warmth of red. Okay, so here I sort of decided to test some color mixes to see how each of them look like when I add white to them or when I mix them with each other. I was also looking for some color combination that I might want to keep permanently in my color stash, because I don't just individually work with each of those colors, I also mainly use them as a base for my mixes. So they're actually my starting point for color mixing. And that's what I was trying to do here, to see how each color behaves, whether some of them might lean a little more warm or cool, like the Permanent Alizarin Crimson from Winsor Newton Galleria. And then I also looked at a few simple mixes that I really liked and also decided might recreate directly in my mixings, because I mixed them in a pre-mixed jar, which is exactly what I ended up doing. One color that really stood out to me was this mix of cobalt blue with permanent alizarin crimson, and then I added white into it, as well as gesso, because I was hoping that the gesso would make the paint a little more gritty, which unfortunately did not work out. And I love how this turned out, because it has a kind of a hint of pink in the background of the purple. It's muted, it's very pretty, but it also has that, I'm not sure how to explain, but it has some a little bit of pink as a stain peeking through the paint, which is very beautiful. Other colors that really stood out to me were these pink mixes, especially the one on the left side, so I decided to also directly premix it in a pot. It is a mix of permanent alizarin crimson with yellow ochre and a little bit of white. It's kind of a salmon peach color, and when I am painting, I am intending to add more white to my painting based on my needs, and otherwise I can also use it with this intensity, which I find very beautiful. In my last art supplies haul video, someone in the comments suggested that I try mixing black paint with yellow. So I did. I experimented with a range of yellows, from warm tones to yellow ochres. I didn't really have a lemon yellow, so I used Holbein's Primary Yellow instead, and also tried the Sennelier Light Olive Green as sort of a cool yellow. That mix turned out to be my favorite. It gave such a beautiful result that I'm definitely going to mix a larger batch of it. I imagine a purple called lemon yellow would create a similar effect too. So thank you to the person that suggested that. Oh, and I almost forgot the acrylic ink from Dalaroni in the color olive green. It's such a beautiful color, but to me it looks more like a sap green than an olive green. And to push it more towards olive green, I decided to mix in a little bit of warm yellow and some orange. I find the orange to be a little bit too overpowering, so I think the perfect mix would be mostly warm yellow and green, and then a really tiny bit of orange, which would then push this color a little bit more towards the olive green I am looking for. Okay, so to test all these materials, we're going to do some painting, and I decided to create a very simple landscape where I can use a variety of colors And then later on, because I really like to work with mixed media, I can add colored pencils on top of them. Also, I decided to gesso the background so that we can really see the intensity of each color and how it performs, because this is exactly how I am planning to use these paints when I'll be working on a canvas. Something I really liked about the gesso, by the way, is the fact that it was quite gritty, so layering pencil on top of it was chef's kiss. Layering colored pencils over these acrylics was a little tricky. It really depended on the pencil and the color. So some colors did show up well, some did not, some brands did, some brands did not. So this is how I ended up thinking I should make a test on how colored pencils behave on top of these acrylics, because I work a lot with mixed media also, so this is actually for me very important. To start with, I decided to gesso the paper so that we also have a little bit an accurate representation of how my paintings are going to be, and then I'll be swatching all the different brands only in one color on this page so that we can try and see which one do take the colored pencils well, which one do not. And we are also going to test them on the gesso so that we can see how the gesso takes the colored pencils or not. Okay, so starting off with the fluid acrylics, I decided to experiment a bit with them to see how they behave with thin lines, because I've been really loving these fluid acrylics ever since I discovered that they can make such delicate, precise lines. Moving on to the colored pencils, I decided to test different kinds of colored pencils to see how they each behave, because maybe some do layer better on the acrylics than others, also in matters of colors. And I also decided to test a regular pencil as well as a new color too. Now that I'm also doing a voiceover, I think I also should have tested oil pastels. But yeah, then we also come really far into the testing of layering, you know, because then we can also try to test how to layer maybe gouache or maybe inks. So I think we're going to keep it at this point for today. But surely if you are interested in such a video, please let me know, because I'll be glad to make one. And on to the colored pencils testing, I think I will let the video talk by itself. One thing I noticed is that the colored pencils had quite some struggle laying on top of the fluid acrylics, especially the Lucas fluid acrylic, but they did layer good on top of the Schminke color, so that one is also fluid acrylic, but perhaps it is applied a little thinner to the paper, or it is transparent, so it still has a little bit of that grit of the paper. Perhaps if it is thicker, it also doesn't take colored pencils as well, but I am not sure because I am sort of still at the beginning stage of working with acrylics, so I'm not sure if this is something that's just regular or colored pencils just have some trouble layering on top of fluid acrylic paint. Okay, so to close off my testings within this video, I'm going to give you a little summary of my impressions so far of those acrylics. I would like to give also a little bit of summary which paints I used and what are my thoughts about them so far. So for the background I used the flash paint and I also mixed it together as I was painting with this one. This is a pre-mixed paint that I already had, and let's say I am quite happy about this flash paint, although it is a little unexpected that it's behaving transparent, but it mixed very well together with this burgundy kind of color. And this next one was made with the Pebeo Studio Acrylics. I'm very surprised about this one and I like it a lot. This is actually the most surprising out of all the paints that I have here and also like one of my favorites. It has a really nice high viscosity to it and it's also quite opaque, and the feel of painting with it is just really nice, which really surprised me with the price point. And I wish that the flash paint would have been a little more flatter like the other flash paints that are opaque, so that it kind of gives more of a different texture to this painting, because I already have quite some streaky patterns down here, as well as some shiny but not super streaky pattern on the right side done with the Pebeo acrylics. So for the tiles in the background, I used a mix of different greens, the sap green from Lucas and then other darker greens from my collection. For the lining, I used the Pebeo Matte Pub, and honestly, it was such a great experience to work with. The lines came out so effortlessly, and yeah, making lines with this paint was actually very enjoyable, which is not something I could say when working with soft body or heavy body acrylics. This was also my first time using fluid acrylics, so I'm so happy I finally found a type of acrylic that lets me create clean and consistent lines without running out of paint within a millimeter or two. One thing I've noticed about the Pebeo Matte Pub is that it's not quite as matte as, let's say, gouache or flash paint. Now this is very minor, I'm being super nitpicky here, so please take this with a grain of salt. Within the matte spectrum, I'd say it sits right at the edge, just before tipping into a more satin finish. I also find that it dries a bit more vibrant, whereas other matte paints often have that very soft, chalky, very flat look. And this one gives more of a depth, I would say, and richness in the color, which actually gives that slightly different, yeah, almost satin look. In my last art haul, I mentioned that I'd probably be buying more of these, but I've actually changed my mind. I realized they perform just as well as other paints I actually own, so for now I don't see the need to get extra colors just for the line work. At least for the moment, I'm happy with what I have, though I don't know, maybe I change my mind later on. I also did the lining of the vases with this Pebeo Matte Pub. And then for the background I used the Acrylic modeling paste, and that's how I also got a bit of that streakiness or brush structure. And I'm not sure if it does look like oil because I've never worked with oil, but please let me know if the effect does look a little bit like oil. I really like the brush stroke and the streakiness that it gave me. So for the flowers I used the ultramarine blue from Lucas and I mixed it together with white. For the white I tend to use the Neo Acryl from gouache and just felt like using that rather than the Liquitex heavy body one. I'm not sure why, maybe I'm not really used to it. And you can also achieve a really nice color blending with more softer body acrylics. And for the leaves I just used the color of the tiles background with some lighter greens. One thing I also really liked was the gesso from Le Franc Bourgeois. It's very nice and matte, and it's also opaque. Well, I'm not really sure. I haven't really tried it on top of some painting to cover them up, for example. I did try to mix it with some paint, hoping to create some kind of a gritty paint. Unfortunately, it did not work out. It's also not as heavy body gesso like my Rosa Studio gesso, and it's definitely runnier. What I really enjoy about this is that it is matte. It has a slight gritty texture to it. It has a bit of tooth to it.
A couple more things I do to keep the hanging clothes in my closet feeling.
And that grittiness is actually something I really like, because one of the reasons why I also did not like working with acrylics before was that many gesso I tried were too smooth. And for me it's just really hard to control the brush on a very smooth surface. Of course, some artists that are doing very precise, clean line work would probably disagree with this, but for my art style, I definitely lean toward more something that's a bit gritty and has some tooth, gives a little bit of a feel of paper. Last but not least, I made a mix using Sennelier's Payne's Grey together with the Liquitex Heavy Body Paint, and I have to say the mix turned out amazing. I've already used it in a painting where I painted water with the mix, and while it wasn't exactly disappointing, I'd say it did surprise me for the fact that it was labeled opaque, but it ended up being quite transparent and streaky. Still, I absolutely love the color. It's one of my favorites from this whole buy. It's such a beautiful shade, and honestly I think I'll also have a hard time replicating and mixing this exact same color. For me it's the perfect subtle blue-gray color, and I love using it in mixes. And I'm still on the hunt for my ideal paints gray, but for now I think I'll just keep mixing my own colors, as I already have plenty of base colors to work with. And even though the transparency was unexpected, I actually like it. It gives the paint a bit of texture and character. You know, those brush marks. And most of my paints are quite opaque, so this one adds a nice bit of variety into my collection. And funny thing is, when I first bought this paint during my art supplies haul, I said it would probably last me forever, but I can already tell it won't. I've used it so much that I think a third of the tube is already gone. I'll definitely be repurchasing it at some point. Before we end this video, one last thing that surprised me a bit and made me wonder if Sennelier changed the formula is the viscosity of their paint. They're labeled as heavy body, I think, or high viscosity paint, but some of the colors felt more like soft body. Not completely runny, just noticeably smoother and lighter than what I know from the Sennelier paints. And when painting, the texture feels different. Heavy body usually has that thick, creamy resistance to them, and these glide way more easily. Now, I'm not sure if this has to do with their new packaging, because now they come in 60ml tubes, though all their heavy body paints also come in deuce tube packaging, so I don't think that is the reason why they're a little more softer. And I do own actually quite some Sennelier paints before this, and I definitely know that they're more on the heavy body side. Although it could be that it's the pigment, because I saw that it was mainly the ones that were behaving more transparently that felt more like soft body colors rather than the ones that were a little bit more opaque. Anyways, this is definitely not something negative, it just caught my attention. And I am just being very picky here, because I am picky about how my acrylics feel like when I am painting, so please take this with a grain of salt. All in all, I'm very happy with these acrylics. Of course, I need to paint more with them to know if I would still like them in the future. But that was it for today. Thank you very much for staying until the end, and until next time, bye!